It's colder tonight than I expected. Not the kind of cold that bites, just the kind that slowly settles in. The longer you sit still, the more it finds its way into your hands, your shoulders, the space between breaths. The fire helps. It always does. Come a little closer. Not too close. Just enough to feel it. That's better. You can feel the difference almost immediately, can't you? The warmth on one side, the cool resting on your back. It's a strange balance, but it works. I've been out here for a while already. Long enough for the fire to settle. You see how it's burning now? Not jumping around, not trying too hard, just holding itself together, slow and steady. That's when it's best, when it stops trying to prove anything. Go ahead, sit how you like. The ground's uneven, but there's always a position that feels right enough. You don't have to fix it completely. Just find something that works. That's all. The wood shifts a little. Hear that? That soft crack? That low, almost hollow sound when something inside finally settles deeper into the heat. You don't need to look at it. You can if you want. But after a while, you stop checking. The light's already there, flickering just enough to keep everything in front of us real and everything behind us not quite. The forest's quiet tonight. Not silent, just quiet in the way it decides to be. Something moved earlier, off to the left, somewhere past the trees. Could have been a branch settling. Could have been something passing through. Doesn't really matter. It didn't come closer. And out here, that's usually all you need to know. Take a breath. There's that smell. Smoke, damp wood, a bit of earth underneath. It sticks to everything out here. Clothes, hands. Even the air feels heavier with it. I don't mind it. Feels grounded. Like you're actually somewhere. Nights like this, people used to sit the same way. Fire in front of them, dark behind them. No lights, no noise. Just this. And they'd talk. Not loudly. Not to entertain, just to pass time, or maybe to make sense of it. Some of the things they talked about, you still hear them, here and there. Stories that never really went away, just changed hands, changed voices. Sometimes they don't even sound like stories anymore, just something someone noticed, something small, something they couldn't quite explain. Have you ever heard about the bells in some of the old monasteries? Not the ones people ring. The other ones. The ones that don't always have someone there. I don't know. Might be nothing. Probably is. But on nights like this, people used to pay attention to things like that. And sometimes they said they heard one too many. You know how monasteries used to keep time, right? Not with clocks like now. With bells. Big ones. Heavy. Hung high above the ground where the sound could carry. Far enough to reach the fields. The roads. Sometimes even the edge of the forest if the wind was right. They had hours for everything. Prayers. Work. Rest. Even waking up in the middle of the night. Especially that one. There's a bell they ring before dawn, long before the sun shows up. When everything is still dark and cold, and the world feels like it hasn't decided to start yet. The monks would wake to that every day. Same sound, same rhythm, no variation. You hear it enough, It becomes part of you. You don't question it. You just move when it tells you to. Now, the thing people used to talk about wasn't the bell itself. It was what happened sometimes, after. Not often. Not just occasionally. They'd be awake already, sitting up, or just opening their eyes, waiting for that sound to tell them it was time. And then it would come clear, slow, exactly like it always did. One strike, then another, then another. Nothing strange about it. Everything normal. Exactly how it should be. But sometimes, after the last bell, after everything should have gone quiet again, there would be one more. Not louder, not softer, just there. Like it had always been part of it, except it wasn't. And the strange part is, no one ever said it sounded wrong. That's what you would expect, right? Something off, something distorted, something to stop and think. But no, they said it sounded exactly the same. Same weight, same tone, same distance. Like it came from the same place. Just not at the right time. Some of them would sit there and listen, waiting to see if it happened again. It didn't. It was always just that one extra. Then silence. Back to normal. Back to what they understood. You'd think they would check. Go up there. See if someone rang it late. But most of them didn't. Or at least, they didn't right away. Because in places like that, routine matters more than anything. And if everything else stayed the same, the next bell came on time, if the day moved the way it always did, then maybe it was easier to just leave it. Let it pass. Explain it later. Or not at all. Some said it was the wind. Carrying the sound, stretching it, letting it linger just a little longer than it should. Some said it was the structure itself. Stone holds sound in strange ways. Echoes don't always behave, sound shifts. How it travels, how it disappears and then comes back, just slightly different. But still, there were nights when they were certain to say, they heard it clean, separate. Not an echo, not a fade. Just one more, exactly placed where it didn't belong. I don't know. Maybe after a while, when you wake at the same hour every night, hear the same sound, live the same pattern, your mind starts to fill in things, or stretch things, or hold on to them a little too long. Out here, you get that sometimes too. A sound that feels closer than it is, or further, or like it came from one place, when it didn't. You stop chasing it after a while, not because it's not there, but because it doesn't really change anything. Still, if you were there, lying awake, waiting for that bell, and you heard one more than you should have, you'd notice, even if you didn't say anything, even if you just lay there and let it pass, you'd notice. There's another one people used to talk about, not in buildings this time. Out here, places like this, forest, roads that don't really feel like roads anymore, ground that shifts under your feet just a little too easily, especially after rain. You don't see it often. Most people don't. And the ones who do don't always agree on what they saw. They describe it differently. Some say it's small, no bigger than a candle flame. Others say it feels further away than it looks, like something you can see clearly, but never quite place, and it doesn't stay still. That's the part almost everyone agrees on. It moves, not quickly, not like something running or flying or trying to get somewhere, just drifting, slow, careful, as if it has all the time it needs. Imagine walking at night, no moon, or very little. The kind of night where your eyes never fully adjust, where everything beyond a certain distance turns into shapes instead of objects. You're following a path you think you know, or at least you think you knew it earlier, before it got this dark. Your steps slow down without you deciding to slow them. You listen more. You look more. You start noticing things you wouldn't in the day. The way the ground feels under your feet, soft in some places, firm in others, the faint sound of water somewhere you can't see. And then you notice something ahead, not bright, not enough to light anything, just enough to be there. A light, small, steady. At first you don't think much of it. Could be someone else. A lantern. Someone walking the same path. It happens. You wouldn't be the only one out here. So you keep moving, slowly, watching it. But something feels off. Not wrong, just not quite right. The distance doesn't change. That's the first thing. You walk. It stays. Not getting closer. Not getting dissolved then. Not in a straight line. Not in any direction thence. Just a slow shift to one side. Then still again. And that when people usually start to think, maybe it's not someone. Maybe it's not a lantern. Because no one walks like that. No one holds a light like that. Not unless they're trying to hide where they're going, or don't know where they're going themselves. Some would follow, carefully, not rushing, just curious, taking a few steps, then stopping, watching, trying to see if it reacts, trying to understand it. But the more they watched, the less it made sense. Sometimes it looked closer, then suddenly further. Sometimes it dimmed, almost gone, then came back exactly the same. Not flickering like fire, not shaking like a hand holding something. Just steady, too steady. And then there were the ones who said it led them somewhere. Not far, not deep into the forest. Just off the path. Enough that when they turned back, they couldn't immediately see where they came from. That's usually when they stopped. Not out of fear. Just something telling them it wasn't worth continuing. That whatever that light was, it didn't belong to them. And they didn't belong to it. There are explanations. There always are. Gases from the ground, swamps, rotting things releasing something that catches light in strange ways. Or your eyes, trying to make sense of darkness, turning shapes into something clearer, something easier to understand. That makes sense. It really does. Especially after a long walk, tired, when your focus shifts, when your mind fills in the parts you don't see. But still, people describe the same thing in different places, different times, without knowing each other. A light that moves slowly. That doesn't follow rules. That doesn't come closer. That doesn't come closer. That doesn't go away either. Out here, you learn something after a while. Not everything you see needs to be followed. 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 Not everything you see needs followed. Not everything you see needs followed. Not everything you see needs to be 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 followed. Everything you see needs to be followed. Not everything needs to be followed. Not everything you see needs to be followed. Not everything you see be followed. Everything you see needs to be followed. Not 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 everything EP9. Not everything you see needs to be followed. 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 Not everything you see needs followed. Not everything you see needs to be 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 followed. Not you see needs to be followed. Not everything you see needs followed. Not everything you see needs to be followed. Everything you see needs to be followed. Not everything you see needs to be followed. Not everything you see needs to be followed. Not everything you see needs followed. Not everything you see needs to be followed. Not everything you see needs to be. Not everything you see needs to be followed. 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 Not everything you see needs followed. Not every see needs to be followed. Not everything you 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 see needs followed. Not everything you see needs to be 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 followed. Not everything you see needs followed. Not everything you see needs followed. Not everything you see needs to be followed. Not everything you see needs to be followed. Not you see needs to be followed. Not everything 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 you see needs to be followed. Nothing you see needs to be followed. Not everything 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 you see needs to be followed. Not. There's one more people don't always talk about directly. Not because it's rare, but because it's harder to explain. You don't see anything. That's the thing. Nothing moves. Nothing stands there. Nothing steps out from the dark. And still, you feel it. It usually happens when you stop moving. That's when you notice it. When the sound of your own steps fades, when the ground stops shifting under your feet, when there's nothing left to focus on except what's already there. You stand still, maybe just for a moment, maybe longer, and then something changes. Not outside, inside. A small shift in awareness, like your senses have turned slightly, without you deciding to turn them. You don't hear anything new. You don't see anything different. But the space around you feels occupied. Not crowded. Not watched in a direct way. Just not empty anymore. It's subtle, so subtle you could ignore it. And most people do. At first, they brush it off, tell themselves it's nothing, just the dark, just the quiet, just the mind doing what it does when it has too little to work with. But then it lingers. That's what makes it not stronger, just longer. long enough that you start to notice your body reacting before your thoughts catch up. Your shoulders hold slightly tighter. Your breath changes. Not faster, just more aware, as if something is listening to it. Out here, it happens easier. No walls, no clear edges, nothing to define where things begin or end. The firelight's only what's in front of us. Everything behind that is left to itself, and your mind fills that not with images, not clearly, just presence. People who walked alone at night used to talk about it, not in detail, just small mentions. A line here, a sentence there. Felt like I wasn't alone. That's usually all they said, and they didn't always mean danger. That's the strange part. It wasn't always fear. Sometimes it was just awareness when it's there. Sentence there. Felt like I wasn't alone. That's usually all they said, and they didn't always mean danger. That's the strange part. It wasn't always. Sometimes it was just awareness. Like when you enter a room and immediately know someone else is there, even before you see them. People who walked alone at night used to talk about it, not in detail, just enough to feel if anything changes. It doesn't. Or maybe it does. In a way you can't measure. Then comes the choice. You can keep standing there. Keep listening. Let the feeling grow. Try to understand it. Or you can let it pass. Let it exist without answering it. That's what most people learn to do. Not because they were brave, but because they realized something simple. Not every feeling needs a source. Not every awareness needs a reason. Out here, you get used to that. The sense that something might be there, without needing to prove it is. The space behind you stays behind you. The forest remains the same. The fire continues to burn. Nothing steps forward. Nothing terrifying, saddening. Prior to the cames to that. The sense that something might be there, without needing to prove it is. The space behind you stays behind you. The forest remains the same. The fire continues to burn. Nothing steps forward. Nothing steps for. Nothing space. There find you. Nothing source. Not every awareness needs a reason. Out here, you get used to that. The sense that something might be there without needing to prove it is. The space behind you stays behind you. The forest remains the same. Fire continues to burn. Nothing steps forward. Nothing senses, oscillating them intensity, can slowly. That feeling fades. Not all at once, just less and less, until it becomes what it probably was from the start. A moment, a shift, something passing through you instead of something waiting for you. Still, if you've ousted, then comes the choice. You can keep standing there, keep listening, that you know exactly what I mean. You don't need to see anything. You don't need to hear anything. Sometimes just the feeling is enough. The fire's still there, exactly where it was. Nothing's changed. You don't turn around. You don't need to. Whatever was behind you, whatever it felt like for a moment, it's already gone. Or maybe it was never there in the first place. Doesn't really matter now. You let your shoulders drop a little more. There it is. That small release. The kind you don't notice until it happens. Your hands rest closer to the fire. Not reaching, just placed there. Letting the warmth do its work slowly. No rush. No adjustment. The heat spreads on its own. Into your fingers. Your palms. Up your arms. Gradually. The heat spreads on its own. Into your fingers. Your palms. Up your arms. Gradually. The heat spreads on its own. Into your palms. Up your arms. Gradually. The wood settles again. A soft shift. A small crack. Nothing sharp. Nothing sudden. Just the quiet sound of something finding its place. You watch it this time. The way the ember glows a little brighter before dimming again. The way a thin edge of wood curls inward, slowly giving in to the heat. There is no urgency in it, no resistance. It just happens. You take a breath. The air feels different now. Warmer in front, cool behind. Balanced again. Familiar. The forest hasn't moved. It never really does. Not in a way that matters. The trees are still there. The space is still the same. Only your attention shifted for a while. That's all. People forget that. How easy it is for the mind to move, even when nothing else does. To create distance, or presence, or meaning, where there might only be quiet. But the fire doesn't do that. It doesn't imagine anything. It doesn't question anything. It just taking. It doesn't imagine anything. It doesn't question anything. It's just imperative. It's just a noun. The sounds are simpler now. Fire, breath, a faint movement of air somewhere above the trees. Nothing layered, nothing uncertain, just clear. Easy to follow, or easy to ignore. Both work. You don't need to think about the stories anymore. They don't ask to be held. They don't stay unless you keep them. And right now, there's no reason to. The warmth stays. Your hands don't move. Your shoulders remain loose. Your breath slows again. In and out. Even. Quiet. The night continues around you. The forest holds its place. And here by the fire, everything returns to something simple. Something steady. Something that doesn't need to be explained. Only felt. Only allowed. Only left as it is. The fire burns low now, almost soft enough to close your eyes. You feel the heat still on your hands. Not hot, comfortable, steady. You notice your shoulders, loose now, relaxed. The way they drop when you stop holding tension you didn't realize was there. The air smells of wood smoke and damp earth. Fresh, calming. You breathe it in slowly, now. Even. The forest is quiet. Nothing moves too fast. Nothing tries to reach you. Only the small noises of night. A leaf brushing another. The faint call of a night bird. Your mind drifts. You think of the stories. Not to hold them. Not to solve them. Just to let them float by, like sparks rising from the fire. They disappear softly. They fade, and you notice your body more, the weight on the ground, the warmth of the fire, the calm in your chest. You allow yourself to wood smoke and damp earth, fresh, calming. You breathe it in slowly and out, even. The forest is quiet. Nothing moves too fast. Nothing contracts to this moment. If you are lying down, feel the surface beneath you supporting your body. If you are sitting, notice the weight of your legs, the calm in your shoulders. Let your mind drift gently, carrying with it the small moments you observed, the quiet life that persists beyond time. May your night be peaceful, your dreams light, and your body rest well. And when you wake tomorrow, carry the rhythm of presence, attention, and quiet beauty with you. Thank you for taking this slow journey with me tonight. Sleep well, and remember, even in dark woods, the ordinary holds quiet wonder.